It's been several years since I last got to review a Thrustmaster wheel on the channel. The first one I ever reviewed was the TSXW, and it was right before the CSL-DD was released and before direct drive became the standard for sim racing. And I'm not gonna lie, there were some things about the TSXW in the sense of like Assetto Corsa drifting that I actually thought were smoother and more consistent with what I expected than I get from the CSL-DD. That being said, the CSL-DD and other direct drive wheels have performed so much better in a sense of like actual GT3 racing and things like that, where the road feedback becomes so much more essential, and like the level of detail, especially at like an 8 or a 10 Newton meter wheel, is far greater than that of a TSXW belt driven wheel. So now Thrustmaster's on their second direct drive wheel, the T598, and this is a direct axial drive, which they claim has clear rim motion and no cogging. So this is something I'm definitely excited to test, but for this video we're going to be unboxing the T598. I was originally hoping to get the tests in as well into this video, but unfortunately there's a few problems with that. First off, this is going to be a pretty long video already as I go through all the different concerns I have, talk about the specs of the wheel, and just share how everything comes together with it and go through the unboxing. The other part of that is I'm expecting a new sim rig or a foldable sim rig for testing that is in the process of being sent to me, and I need to be able to attach this wheelbase to that to test it, because tearing down my sim rig is quite a chore in and of itself, and I don't want to have to do that every time that I'm testing a new wheelbase. So we're going to wait on the new sim rig before we get to test this, but I definitely have a lot of insight on some concerns and things I have with the wheel, and I look forward to sharing it with you in this unboxing. All right, let's get this thing opened up and check out the insides. As expected, first thing right on top, instructions. Not too worried about those. We put together a few wheels. Really want to get the box open and see what's inside of it. The wheelbase and wheel are right on top, so I guess we'll get started by talking about the wheelbase. Alright, so this is a pretty sturdy wheelbase, quite heavy. One of my first things that I'm not necessarily happy with is just how big around it is. It's not very thick, as you can see. It's a pretty shallow wheelbase, but it is just quite large, and I think that has to do with the new direct drive that they're using in it. It takes up more space, but it also just feels like if I were to mount this to my sim rig and try to get a true field of view and point of view video, that this is just going to be too large and bulky to do what I want to do with it. The next thing I want to point out, and this may take a little bit of a tricky camera angle to get this, but there's a quick release system here, and as you can see, this is a plastic lever. It does have a metal piece in the middle here attached to another piece of plastic up on the top or over on the side. I can't see where I'm looking here. Now you'll notice as I close that, two prongs come out, and that's, we can kind of show those two prongs in here. I have concerns with these as they're plastic prongs, and I'm not quite sure for longevity whether that's going to hold well with the wheel in it. What I'm thinking is, like, based on the shape, from a steering perspective, it should be fine. It should lock in nice. It shouldn't impact a lot of wobble in the wheel. But over time, and if it's pulled on, I think that these could break or start to wear, and I have concerns that I'll get to with that in a minute more when we talk about the steering wheel. On the back side of the wheelbase, you've got all your connections for the pedals, the shifter. You've also got, you know, your USB, your power, all those things, typical, what you would expect on the wheelbase. On this particular system, there is no LCD screen or anything on the wheel itself. It's actually right here in the middle, and we've got 4 buttons attached to the wheelbase. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this settings button is going to be the one that's used to adjust all the strength settings and different tweaks that are done to the racing wheel, but if it is, that's kind of an inconvenient location. because I do want to be able to adjust on the fly. So if I've got to take my hand off the wheel to hit the button to get into the settings, and if I can't adjust while I'm driving, that is kind of a drawback, but not necessarily a feature you would expect to find readily available and easy to tune on a lower end wheelbase like this. All right, now let's talk about the wheel. You might notice I've got a couple of my Fanatec wheels over here with me. Now, this wheel in particular, I think is going to be probably one of the most disappointing things about this. First off, what feels like a pretty cheap plastic for the rim. It does have some rubber grip. It doesn't look bad, like it's not a horrible looking wheel. It's got the, faux carbon fiber middle and everything. But as far as just how it feels very much more like a toy racing wheel or something you would get with the old Logitech, like the G29s and stuff like that. Like this feels very G29 to me. And those, don't get me wrong, I got started with the G29, thought it was an awesome wheel to start out with, but now that we're into the direct drives and the technology's changed and stuff, I think I would have liked a little bit more. Now, let's do a comparison. I just kind of want to show the size difference. If I line this up with the Fanatec wheel, I guess we'll line it up properly. Give you a little bit of a comparison so you can see that this wheel is just slightly smaller. It's not quite as big around. It also isn't quite as much grip size as the Fanatec has. And another thing that I've found with this wheel and checking it out is the shifters just don't have any kind of tactile or feel to them. Like they're very spongy, soft shifting levers. There's no tactile click to them. There's not like a point where if you push it in slow, it has more give. Like it just feels somewhere in there I'm hitting the button and I can't really tell where. And let me just, for comparison, here's the Fanatec wheel. This is probably their cheapest model of Fanatec wheel. It does have a nice metal shifter to it. And as you can hear, there is a little bit of tactile click to it. And I can feel a release point in this wheel. When I pull the shifter, there is something where I feel where the shift is happening and something to indicate that. And then if we go over to a slightly, what should be a more higher end wheel, the hub on this one is actually plastic shifters, which doesn't necessarily bother me, but you can hear the tactile click in it. And I like to be able to hear the click when it shifts. I like the feeling of knowing where it's shifting also. Now, it's not really outside the idea of thinking that Thrustmaster may want to do an upgradable wheel for this wheelbase. So that could be why they just wanted to start with like a base model that would entice people to want to upgrade. And that might be why we got what we got with this wheel. It's not even remotely uncommon for them to release part of a technology with plans of upgrades, and that's obviously something they want to do to increase the profitability of a new racing wheel or wheelbase or whatever it is that they're releasing. Now, I do want to share with you the back of this racing wheel. So this is the quick release system, and I was kind of explaining with the base. It does have a nice solid notch system here, and I feel like when this drops in, it should be fairly sturdy inside the wheelbase. But one of the things, as I talk about those tabs inside the wheelbase that I'm concerned about, you also may notice that the contact points, instead of being in the center, they're a very shallow contact point on both sides where the prongs will lock in. And I feel like I said, if there's a lot of pulling on this, or somebody were to get up by holding onto the wheel, you have kids in the house, whatever the case may be, and that wears out, these contact points may not make contact anymore. The wheel may just altogether bust out. So I do have some concerns with how this locks in, but at the same time, the reliability of a composite structure really, I'm not too sold on anyways after my experience with with the Fanatec wheel. Just for one more comparison, I have both Fanatec wheels here. This is the plastic quick release that is like a twist on, and it does lock in, but there is a lot of flex in it, and I do feel like this is not too much more solid than what we're going to get with the Thrustmaster, and this was the entry-level version of it. So I'm not judging too much, but at the same time, you also have your solid metal quick release on this wheel. This doesn't have any movement in it. When I put this on, it's nice and sturdy. It's what I want it to feel like. It doesn't make a bunch of noises. The amount of noise alone that comes from a composite hub like this, or at least from Fanatec, is pretty ridiculous. But with this Thrustmaster, we're going to have to test it and see if that same thing happens. All right, now let's get a little moment of truth and combine the two. Try to line this up. It's going to drop in, and then the latch should lock it in place. All right, it feels like it locked in pretty sturdy, but what I wanted to see really, and I think if I turn it this way, not that it should really matter, I wanted to look at the flex. Now the base itself is on a plastic table, so there is some flex in it, but I can also see movement in the upper part of the wheel, which you don't really use too much when steering. If you're steering properly, your hands are going to be locked in on the sides of the wheel, which actually seems to be pretty sturdy. I'm actually surprised by that. There's a lot of flexing in the top parts, and like I said, it does feel kind of cheap up there, but where the hands go, like this is kind of like just a false middle almost. It doesn't feel like it's got a solid ring in it or anything where there's not going to be any movement. But where the hands go, it actually feels like there's not going to be a lot of movement. I think this actually might be locked in and be more sturdy than what we got with Fanatec. So I'm kind of surprised by that. All right, guys, we're down to the bottom of the box. We've got the base mount here. Basically, if you're unable to mount your wheel from underneath, which I don't think is going to be an issue for me on the rig I'll be testing on, but if I were to test this on my main sim rig, I would absolutely need to use this because I cannot mount from underneath. So this gives me an option to mount underneath and then go directly to the rig. And of course, it adds a little bit of angle, which you can adapt for, hopefully, with whatever you're using for mounting. And then this I found really interesting. These are the pedals, which I've seen Thrustmaster sell full assembly pedals, and I've seen other brands that'll sell them completely disassembled. But what I've never seen from any of the pedals I've bought so far, and maybe this is more common than I realize, but the actual spring and sensors and everything are removed, and the rest of the assembly is intact. So you have to actually add your springs and everything into the wheelbase, which obviously not a complicated task, nothing to be too concerned with, just different than I'm used to. There is also desk mounting hardware. And then over here, also have skid pads, like carpet grips for the pedals. So realistically, if we wanted to test this on the desk, we do have a good option to, those actually feel like they would lock the carpet pretty well. And that's maybe the first time I've seen a set of pedals that comes with such a thick, I gotta open this up. I think you guys gotta see a little bit better what I'm referring to here, because the carpet prongs on that are actually pretty sturdy carpet prongs. And that's not something I would have expected to see, but cool nonetheless. And then the other box, of course, you've got your power supply, which considerably smaller than what I'm using on my Fanatec power supply. Not going to be as cumbersome to find a place to just stick it onto on the side of the rig or something like that. And then different connectors, power cords, USB, all the rest of the assembly you would need to get this thing up and running. One last thing I think is worth noting about the pedals. You'll notice there are only 2 pedals, and Thrustmaster does have intentions of releasing a load cell pedal in order to make this a 3-pedal system, but it hasn't come out yet. And I find this kind of interesting because nowadays, like, I think as sim racers, most of us realize the importance of a load cell pedal. and the importance of a good set of pedals in general, because realistically, you can do a lot of things with a racing wheel and not see a lot of improvement in consistency. But one thing that makes a huge difference is the pedal set. And just not offering a load cell pedal right out the gate, I think, is a little bit disappointing. But again, going back to what I said about the racing wheel, it's an opportunity to offer an upgrade to the system and profit from it. And of course, as much as some of us might be a little deterred by that or frustrated with that logic, the fact of the matter is these companies need to make money to survive so they can continue to provide new equipment and things like that. So hate it, love it. I'm in the middle on it, but at the same time, I get the logic behind it, and we'll just have to wait and see how their new load cell pedal performs in comparison to something like the TLCM, where it wasn't a more modular system where you could build it and it just came as one solid setup. And to be honest with you, I wasn't completely opposed to that pedal set either. It wasn't nearly as good as some of the other ones I've come across since, but at the time I found it to be quite a bit of an improvement in consistency over the base model Thrustmaster pedals that I tested originally. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm waiting on a Racing GT foldable cockpit to properly test this wheel. I'm hoping that 5 Newton meters with the upshoot on top of it will be enough force to make sure that the Racing GT sim rig is going to be durable for those of you looking for something that's both foldable and just if you don't have the space for a full-size rig. I think it's going to be a great option. It's already on sale on their website. It is going to be probably even cheaper with Black Friday deals. If you check out the affiliate link in my description, you'll even get a 5% discount on top of whatever sales taking place between now and Black Friday. So there's a lot of things with that rig that is going to make this wheel a great way to test it. On the other hand, I'm also really looking forward to testing the wheel out and seeing how it performs and how it's going to hold up and how it's going to work with some of the racing titles that we probably play the most. So by midweek, I should be getting out the video on the sim rig. Watch out for another update and full test review video of the T598, and I'll see you guys on the next video.